The morning sun cast golden rays through the tall windows of Westminster Abbey, illuminating centuries of history within its ancient walls. Outside, thousands of people lined the streets of London, their faces bright with anticipation. Flags waved in the gentle breeze, and the air buzzed with an energy that only comes once in a generation. This was no ordinary day. This was the day the world would witness something truly remarkable. Inside a private chamber of Buckingham Palace, Catherine stood before an ornate mirror, her reflection showing a woman who had traveled an extraordinary journey. Her hands trembled slightly as she touched the delicate fabric of her ceremonial gown. The dress was a masterpiece of ivory silk and intricate embroidery, each stitch representing the weight of responsibility she was about to embrace. Her stylist moved carefully around her, making final adjustments, but Catherine's mind was far away. She thought back to her childhood in Berkshire, running through fields with her siblings, never imagining that one day she would stand at the center of a historic royal ceremony. Her parents had raised her with strong values, teaching her the importance of duty, compassion, and staying true to herself. Those lessons felt more important now than ever before. The girl who once dreamed simple dreams was about to step into a role that would define not just her life, but the lives of millions who looked to the royal family for stability and hope. In another room, William adjusted his ceremonial uniform, his fingers working mechanically on the buttons while his thoughts raced. He had been preparing for this moment his entire life, yet nothing could truly prepare someone for the reality of it. The weight of the crown was not just physical but emotional, carrying with it the memories of his mother, the expectations of his father, and the hopes of a nation. He closed his eyes briefly, remembering Princess Diana's warm smile and her words about leading with heart. She would have been so proud to see this day. His private secretary knocked gently on the door, reminding him of the schedule. Time was moving forward, whether he felt ready or not. William straightened his shoulders and looked at himself one final time. He was not just a son or a husband today. He was about to become a symbol of continuity, of tradition meeting the modern world. The responsibility felt enormous, but when he thought of Catherine by his side, he found strength. They had always been a team, supporting each other through every challenge. Meanwhile, in the nursery, Prince George sat quietly with his siblings, Charlotte and Louis. A nanny read them stories to keep them calm, but George's young mind understood that today was different. His parents had explained it to him in simple terms, trying to help him comprehend the significance without overwhelming him. He would have a special role in the ceremony, and though he was nervous, he wanted to make his parents proud. Charlotte held his hand, sensing her brother's tension, while Louis played with a toy soldier, blissfully unaware of the magnitude of the day. Across London, Sarah Mitchell sat in her small apartment, her eyes fixed on the television screen. She was a single mother of two, working long hours at a local hospital as a nurse. Life had been difficult lately, with bills piling up and her children needing so much. But today she had taken the morning off to watch the coronation. There was something about the royal family that gave her hope, a reminder that dignity and grace could exist even in challenging times. She had always admired Catherine's down-to-earth nature and William's commitment to mental health causes. They felt real to her, not distant figures in a palace. In a care home in Manchester, elderly Margaret Thompson sat in the community room with other residents, all gathered around the television. Margaret was 92 years old and had witnessed many royal events in her lifetime. She remembered Queen Elizabeth's coronation as if it were yesterday, the excitement and unity it brought to a nation recovering from war. Now, seeing a new generation step forward, she felt a bittersweet mixture of nostalgia and hope. The world had changed so much, yet some traditions remained, connecting past and present in a beautiful thread of continuity. Back at the palace, Catherine's mother, Carol, helped her daughter with the final touches. No words were needed between them. A mother's pride and concern were evident in her gentle movements and misty eyes. She had watched Catherine grow from a confident young woman into someone who carried herself with remarkable grace under pressure. Carol thought about all the criticism her daughter had faced over the years, the scrutiny from media and public, yet Catherine had remained steadfast, never losing her kindness or her smile. Today was vindication of her daughter's strength and character. The motorcade began to form outside the palace gates. Security personnel moved with practiced precision, checking every detail multiple times. The route to Westminster Abbey had been planned meticulously, ensuring both safety and allowing the public to catch glimpses of the royal couple. Mounted guards on magnificent horses stood ready, their armor polished to perfection, reflecting the morning light. Everything had to be perfect, not for vanity, but because this moment would be recorded in history books, remembered by generations yet to come. Inside the abbey, distinguished guests from around the world took their seats. World leaders, diplomats, celebrities, and charity representatives filled the ancient pews. The orchestra tuned their instruments, preparing to play music that would stir souls and mark this momentous occasion. Flowers adorned every corner, carefully chosen to represent hope, unity, and the natural beauty of the British Isles. The scent of lilies and roses filled the air, mixing with the smell of old wood and stone that had witnessed countless ceremonies over the centuries. Television crews from every corner of the globe had set up their equipment, ready to broadcast this event to billions of viewers. Commentators spoke in hushed, reverent tones about the significance of the day, sharing historical context and personal anecdotes about William and Catherine. Social media exploded with posts, hashtags trending worldwide as people shared their excitement and good wishes. The coronation was not just a British event but a global moment, reminding the world of tradition, ceremony, and the enduring fascination with royalty. In a school in Wales, teachers had set up a special viewing area for students. They wanted the children to witness history, to understand the importance of service and duty. Young faces watched the screen with curiosity and wonder, asking questions about crowns and castles, about what it meant to be royal. Their teachers explained gently about responsibility, about using privilege to help others, about the balance between tradition and progress. These lessons would stay with the children long after the ceremony ended. The clock ticked closer to the appointed hour. Catherine took one last deep breath, feeling the magnitude of the moment settle over her like a cloak. She was ready. Years of preparation, of learning protocols, of understanding her role, had led to this point. But more than the training, it was her heart that would guide her. She knew that beyond the ceremony and the crown, what mattered most was staying true to herself and serving with genuine compassion. William appeared at her door, extending his hand. Their eyes met, and in that silent exchange, they shared strength, love, and determination. Together, they would face whatever came next. The journey to Westminster Abbey was about to begin, and the world waited with bated breath. The golden carriage rolled forward, its wheels crunching softly against the carefully maintained roads of London. Inside, William and Catherine sat side by side, their hands clasped together in a gesture that spoke volumes about their partnership. Through the windows, they could see the massive crowds that had gathered, people of all ages waving flags and cheering with an enthusiasm that touched their hearts. Children sat on their parents' shoulders, elderly couples held hands, and strangers became friends in this shared moment of celebration. Catherine's heart swelled with emotion as she waved to the crowd. She saw a young girl no more than 7 years old holding a handmade sign that read, "We love you, Kate." The child's face beamed with pure joy, and Catherine felt tears prick her eyes. This was what it was all about, she realized. Not the pageantry or the protocol, but the connection with people, the ability to bring happiness and hope into their lives, even if just for a moment. She made a mental note of the little girl's face, wanting to remember this genuine expression of affection. William squeezed her hand gently, understanding without words what she was feeling. He too was overwhelmed by the outpouring of support. After years of being in the public eye, he had developed a thick skin against criticism and intrusion. But moments like these broke through his defenses. These were real people, with real lives and real challenges, who had taken time from their busy schedules to come and celebrate with them. Many had camped out overnight, enduring cold and discomfort, just to catch a glimpse of the procession. Their dedication was humbling. Among the crowd stood James Chen, a teacher from East London who had brought his entire class to witness the historic event. James was not originally British, having immigrated from Hong Kong as a child, but he had grown to love this country and its traditions. He wanted his students, who came from diverse backgrounds and cultures, to experience this piece of British heritage. As the carriage passed, his students erupted in cheers, their young voices adding to the symphony of celebration. James felt proud not just of the country, but of his students' enthusiasm and openness to embracing this shared cultural moment. Further down the route, Emily Rodriguez stood with her grandmother, who had traveled all the way from Spain to be here. The elderly woman had followed Princess Diana's story decades ago and had watched William grow up through news reports and magazines. She had tears streaming down her face as the carriage approached, overcome with emotion at seeing Diana's son on his way to such an important ceremony. Emily held her grandmother close, understanding that this moment represented something deeper than just a royal event. It was about continuity, about seeing a story that began long ago reach a new chapter. Inside Westminster Abbey, the atmosphere was electric with anticipation. The Archbishop stood near the altar, reviewing his notes one final time. He understood the weight of the responsibility on his shoulders. The words he would speak today had been refined over centuries, connecting this modern ceremony to countless others that had come before. Yet he also knew that each coronation was unique, reflecting the personalities and the era of those being crowned. William and Catherine had asked for certain modifications to the traditional ceremony, wanting to include elements that reflected modern values while respecting ancient traditions. The choir members adjusted their robes and cleared their throats, preparing to sing hymns that would lift spirits and create an atmosphere of reverence. They had practiced for months, perfecting every note, understanding that their voices would carry the emotional weight of the ceremony. The youngest choir member, a 14-year-old boy named Oliver, felt his stomach flutter with nerves. He had been chosen for his pure, clear voice, but now, facing this momentous occasion, he worried about making a mistake. The choir director caught his eye and gave him an encouraging nod, reminding him that he was ready. The carriage finally arrived at the Abbey's entrance. As William and Catherine stepped out, a hush fell over the nearby crowd. This was the threshold moment, the point of no return. Catherine paused for just a second, taking in the magnificent Gothic architecture before her, the ancient stones that had witnessed so much history. She thought about all the queens who had walked through these doors before her, each carrying her own hopes, fears, and dreams. She was joining a lineage of remarkable women, and the thought both terrified and inspired her. William placed his hand on the small of her back, a gesture of support and solidarity. They had made this journey together, from university students to young parents, to this moment of profound significance. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them as partners. As they began to walk toward the entrance, the crowd's cheers swelled once again, a wave of sound that seemed to physically lift them forward. Catherine allowed herself a genuine smile, letting the warmth of the public's affection wash over her. Inside, young Prince George stood with his siblings in a designated area, watched over by trusted staff members. He could hear the commotion outside and knew his parents were arriving. His small hands fidgeted with his ceremonial outfit, and he took deep breaths the way his father had taught him. Charlotte leaned over and whispered words of encouragement to her brother, showing a maturity beyond her years. Even young Louis seemed to sense the importance of the moment, staying unusually still and quiet. As William and Catherine entered the Abbey, a magnificent fanfare erupted from the trumpets positioned in the gallery above. The sound reverberated through the ancient space, announcing their arrival in a way that sent shivers down spines. The congregation rose as one, all eyes turning toward the couple making their way down the long aisle. Catherine kept her gaze forward, her training taking over, but she was acutely aware of every eye upon her, every camera recording her steps, every person holding their breath. In homes across Britain and around the world, people sat glued to their screens. In Tokyo, a young woman named Yuki watched from her tiny apartment, fascinated by the ceremony's blend of ancient and modern. In Sydney, a group of friends gathered for a coronation viewing party despite the late hour. In New York, cafes played the ceremony on large screens, attracting crowds of curious onlookers. The reach of this moment extended far beyond the Abbey's walls, touching lives in ways both profound and simple. Back in the Abbey, the Archbishop stepped forward to begin the ceremony. His voice, strong and clear, filled the sacred space with words that had been spoken for generations. But as he looked at William and Catherine, He saw not just future monarchs, but two people who genuinely cared about service, about making a difference, about using their position for good. This gave him hope that the institution they represented could continue to evolve and remain relevant in an ever-changing world. The ceremony began in earnest, each element carefully choreographed yet feeling organic and meaningful. The music swelled at precisely the right moments. The readings were delivered with passion and clarity. The symbolism of each ritual, from the anointing to the presentation of regalia, carried centuries of meaning while speaking to contemporary hearts. Outside, the crowds listened to the ceremony through speakers, their silence a mark of respect and engagement. This was more than entertainment. This was a nation and indeed a world witnessing the making of history. The moment arrived when William knelt before the Archbishop, his head bowed in humility and reverence. The ancient words of blessing echoed through Westminster Abbey, carrying the weight of over 1,000 years of tradition. Catherine watched from her designated position, her heart pounding so loudly she was certain others could hear it. She had witnessed William in countless situations, from moments of joy to times of profound grief, but she had never seen him look quite like this. There was a vulnerability in his posture, an acceptance of something far greater than himself. The Archbishop's hands moved in sacred gestures above William's head, and then came the moment everyone had been waiting for. The crown, glittering with precious stones and heavy with history, was lifted carefully. Time seemed to slow as it descended toward William's head. In that suspended moment, Catherine felt the full enormity of what was happening. This was not just ceremony or theater. This was transformation. The man she had fallen in love with at university was becoming something more, taking on a mantle of responsibility that would define the rest of his life. As the crown settled onto William's head, a collective intake of breath rippled through the abbey. Then, as if released from a spell, the congregation erupted in applause and cheers. The sound was joyous, almost euphoric, bouncing off the ancient walls and creating a cocoon of celebration. William stood slowly, adjusting to the physical weight of the crown, and turned to face the assembly. His eyes immediately found Catherine, and in that gaze she saw everything: fear and strength, uncertainty and determination, love and commitment. Catherine's own moment was approaching rapidly, and she felt her pulse quicken. She had rehearsed the movements countless times, knew exactly where to stand and when to move, but no amount of practice could prepare her for the emotional reality. As she stepped forward, her legs felt both too heavy and too light, as if she were walking through water. The train of her dress swept behind her, attended by young pages who moved with practiced precision. She was aware of millions of eyes watching, judging, hoping, celebrating. When she knelt, the cool stone pressed against her knees even through the cushion provided. She kept her eyes lowered, focusing on her breathing, on staying present in this moment rather than being overwhelmed by its significance. The Archbishop's voice washed over her, speaking words of duty, service, compassion, and faith. Each word seemed to land in her heart, not as a burden but as a calling. She had always believed in using privilege to help others, and now she was being formally charged with that responsibility. The crown destined for her head was lifted into view. Catherine caught a glimpse of it from the corner of her eye and felt a wave of emotion so strong it nearly broke her composure. This was not just about her. This was about every woman who had fought for recognition, every mother trying to balance duty and family, every person who had ever felt they did not quite fit into a predetermined role. She was carrying their hopes and dreams, representing possibilities and progress while honoring tradition. As the crown was placed upon her head, Catherine felt tears slip down her cheeks. She had not meant to cry, had tried so hard to maintain perfect composure, but the moment was simply too powerful. The weight of the crown was surprising, and she understood now why it was called a burden as much as an honor. Yet there was also something strangely comforting about it. As if by accepting this weight, she was joining a sisterhood of women who had carried similar loads throughout history. When she stood and turned to face William, their eyes met and held. In that look, they had an entire conversation without words. They acknowledged the magnitude of what they had just undertaken. They reminded each other of their love and partnership. They drew strength from each other's presence. William reached out and took her hand, a gesture not part of the official protocol but so perfectly them that no one thought to object. For just a moment, they were not symbols or figureheads. They were two people who had chosen to face this extraordinary journey together. The congregation erupted once more, and this time the emotion in the room was palpable. People were crying openly now, not from sadness but from the sheer overwhelming beauty of the moment. Complete strangers reached out to hold hands with those sitting beside them. Centuries of class division and social hierarchy seemed to dissolve in this shared experience of witnessing something truly special. The ceremony had transcended its formal elements to become something deeply human and moving. In the gallery, the photographers captured every angle, every expression, knowing these images would be studied for generations. But even these hardened professionals who had seen countless royal events found themselves moved. One photographer, a woman named Helen who had covered royal stories for 30 years, lowered her camera briefly to simply watch. She had grown cynical about the monarchy over time, questioning its relevance in the modern world. But this moment reminded her of why these traditions persisted. There was something about the combination of history, ceremony, and genuine human emotion that spoke to something deep within the human psyche. Outside the abbey, the crowds listened to the ceremony through loudspeakers, and as the announcer described the crowning moments, a cheer went up that could be heard for miles. Strangers hugged each other. People waved flags with renewed energy. Street vendors handed out free commemorative items caught up in the spirit of generosity. For this day at least, London felt united in a way that seemed increasingly rare in a divided world. In a pub in Liverpool, hardened factory workers who usually mocked royal events found themselves with lumps in their throats. One man, a vocal critic of the monarchy, wiped away tears and joked gruffly about allergies, but his friends saw the truth. There was something about William and Catherine, about their obvious love and commitment that transcended political opinions. They represented stability and continuity in uncertain times, and even skeptics could appreciate that. Back in the abbey, the ceremony continued with the presentation of various symbols of authority and responsibility. Each item, from the orb to the scepter, carried layers of meaning accumulated over centuries. William and Catherine accepted each one solemnly, understanding that these were not mere decorations but representations of the trust placed in them by the nation and the Commonwealth. The weight in their hands was physical, but the weight on their hearts was far greater. Prince George, watching from his special seat, felt pride swell in his young chest. These were his parents up there, looking so grand and important, yet still the same loving people who tucked him in at night and helped with homework. He did not fully understand everything happening, but he grasped that it was significant. Someday he knew he might stand where his father stood now. The thought was both exciting and terrifying, but watching his parents' strength and grace gave him hope that when his time came, he too would be ready. The Archbishop raised his hands for a final blessing, his voice strong and filled with emotion. He had performed many important ceremonies in his career, but this one would define his legacy. As he spoke words of hope, faith, and service, he looked at William and Catherine and saw two people who genuinely wanted to make a difference. That, more than any crown or title, was what gave this moment its power. This was not about maintaining privilege but about accepting responsibility, not about being served but about serving others. The final notes of the ceremony's closing hymn faded into reverent silence. William and Catherine stood before the congregation, crowned and transformed yet somehow still themselves. The magnificent music had been provided by the combined voices of the Abbey Choir, whose angelic sound seemed to lift every soul in attendance toward something greater. Even the most secular attendees felt touched by the spiritual atmosphere that had been created through centuries-old ritual and genuine human emotion. As the newly crowned couple began their procession back down the aisle, the gathered dignitaries and guests rose in a synchronized wave of respect. Catherine's heart fluttered with each step, acutely aware that her life had irrevocably changed in the past hour. The crown upon her head was a constant physical reminder of the promises she had made, the duties she had accepted. Yet when she glanced at William walking beside her, she found courage. They had faced challenges before, from intense media scrutiny to personal losses, and they had emerged stronger together. The Abbey doors opened to reveal the London sky, now bright with midday sun. The roar from the waiting crowds was immediate and overwhelming, a wall of sound that greeted them like a living thing. Thousands upon thousands of voices merged into one jubilant cry of celebration and welcome. William and Catherine paused at the threshold, taking in the sea of faces, the forest of flags, the pure energy of this historic moment. This was their first appearance as crowned sovereigns, and the public's reaction confirmed what they had hoped to achieve, a genuine connection built on respect and affection. The return journey to Buckingham Palace was scheduled to be longer and more elaborate than their arrival, allowing more people along the route to glimpse the newly crowned couple. As they settled into the ornate state carriage, Catherine finally allowed herself to breathe deeply. The most formal, solemn part of the day was complete. Now came the celebration, the acknowledgement of the public's role in this historic moment. She looked down at her hands, still trembling slightly from the intensity of the ceremony, and then at William, who seemed both exhausted and energized. They held hands once more as the carriage rolled forward, drawn by magnificent horses that had been specially trained for this occasion. The animals moved with dignified grace, their hooves creating a steady rhythm on the London streets. Military bands positioned along the route began to play, their music adding to the festive atmosphere. Soldiers in ceremonial dress stood at attention, their precision and discipline a reminder of the order and tradition that the monarchy represented to many. Along the route, the crowds pressed forward, everyone wanting the best view possible. Mobile phones were held high, recording personal memories of this shared experience. Some people cried openly, overwhelmed by the emotion of the moment. Others simply stared in wonder, trying to commit every detail to memory. Children waved small flags with such enthusiasm that their parents had to steady them. Elderly observers sat in chairs, many having waited for hours, their patience rewarded with this procession of pageantry and history. In one section of the crowd, a group of military veterans stood together, their medals gleaming in the sunlight. They had served under William's grandmother and father, and now they were witnessing the continuation of that tradition. For them, the monarchy represented more than just ceremony. It symbolized continuity, national identity, and the values they had fought to protect. As the carriage passed, they saluted sharply, their gesture one of respect and recognition. William, seeing them, nodded in acknowledgement, his own military service giving him deep appreciation for their dedication. Not far away, a young couple with a newborn baby held their daughter up toward the carriage. They wanted their child's first major outing to be this historic event, creating a memory that would last a lifetime, even if the baby would not consciously remember it. The mother whispered to her daughter about the importance of public service, about how these people in the carriage had dedicated their lives to something greater than themselves. It was a lesson in duty and commitment, values she hoped to instill in her child. The procession passed by hospitals where patients watched from windows, many in beds, but not wanting to miss this moment. Medical staff took breaks to join in the viewing, grateful for this brief respite from their demanding work. Catherine, always passionate about healthcare and mental health causes, made a point to wave specifically toward the hospital buildings, knowing that some of the people watching faced daily battles with illness and pain. Her gesture was small but noticed, and it meant the world to those who saw it. In schools along the route, children had been given permission to step outside and witness the procession. Teachers struggled to maintain order as the excitement grew, but even the strictest educators found themselves caught up in the moment. This was living history, the kind that textbooks could never fully capture. Young minds absorbed the pageantry, the music, the crowds, and perhaps most importantly, the sense that they were part of something significant. Years later, they would tell their own children and grandchildren about the day they saw the coronation procession. Social media exploded with posts, photos, and videos from every angle imaginable. The hashtags related to the coronation trended worldwide, with people from every continent sharing their thoughts and reactions. Some posts were reverent and emotional, others humorous and lighthearted, but almost all carried an underlying current of appreciation for the spectacle and significance of the event. Even critics of the monarchy found themselves acknowledging the skill and precision with which the ceremony had been executed. Television commentators struggled to capture the atmosphere in words, often resorting to simple observations because the moment transcended typical analysis. One veteran broadcaster who had covered royal events for 40 years finally said simply, "What we are witnessing is magic. There is no other word for it." His colleague nodded in agreement, understanding that sometimes the most profound moments are the ones that leave us speechless. Inside the carriage, William and Catherine continued to wave, their arms growing tired but their smiles remaining genuine. They caught glimpses of homemade signs with messages of love and support, saw elderly women dabbing at their eyes with handkerchiefs, noticed young children perched on their parents' shoulders with expressions of wonder. Each face represented a story, a life touched in some small way by this moment. The realization of their reach, their potential to bring joy and inspiration, was both humbling and empowering. As they approached Buckingham Palace, the crowds grew even denser. People had staked out positions hours ago, determined to be present when the newly crowned couple appeared on the famous balcony. The anticipation was building toward that iconic moment, the one that would be replayed in news broadcasts and remembered in photographs for generations to come. The carriage slowed as it entered the palace grounds, passing through gates that had welcomed and protected monarchs for centuries. Catherine felt a mix of relief and anticipation. The most formal part of the day was behind them, but significant moments still lay ahead. There would be the balcony appearance, the formal photographs, the evening reception. Yet for now, for just these few minutes, they could take a breath before stepping once more into the public eye. William squeezed her hand and she understood his unspoken message. They had done well. They had honored tradition while bringing their own authenticity to the role. Together they had crossed a threshold into a new chapter of their lives, and whatever challenges awaited, they would face them as partners, just as they always had. Inside Buckingham Palace, the atmosphere shifted from public ceremony to private moment. Staff members moved efficiently but quietly, helping William and Catherine prepare for their balcony appearance. The couple finally had a brief chance to speak privately, away from cameras and crowds. Catherine reached up to touch the crown on her head, still adjusting to its presence, its meaning. William watched her with a mixture of love and concern, knowing exactly what she was feeling because he felt it too. Their children were brought to them, and the transformation from ceremonial figures to parents was immediate and beautiful. George rushed forward first, his formal composure finally breaking as he hugged his mother carefully, mindful of her elaborate dress. Charlotte followed, her eyes wide with excitement telling them how beautiful everything had been. Little Louis, overwhelmed by the long day, simply wanted to be held. William scooped him up, crown and all, proving that even in the most historic moments, fatherhood remained his most important role. The family stylist made quick adjustments to everyone's appearance, ensuring they would look perfect for the balcony moment. But there was also laughter now. Jokes and casual conversation that reminded them all that beneath the crowns and ceremony, they were still a family. Catherine knelt down to look her children in the eyes, explaining that they would all step out together and wave to the people. She wanted them to understand the significance but not be frightened by it. George nodded seriously, understanding the responsibility, while Charlotte asked if she could wave with both hands, bringing smiles to everyone's faces. Outside, the crowd in front of Buckingham Palace had swelled to extraordinary numbers. People were packed tightly together, standing shoulder to shoulder, all faces turned upward toward the famous balcony. The atmosphere was electric with anticipation. Every few moments, someone would start a cheer or begin singing the national anthem, and the crowd would join in, their collective voice powerful and moving. They had waited hours for this moment, and their patience was about to be rewarded. Among the crowd stood Rachel Williams, a teacher from Newcastle who had driven down overnight with her sister. Rachel had never been particularly interested in the royal family, but something about William and Catherine had captured her attention. She admired how they handled pressure with grace, how they used their platform for charitable causes, how they seemed genuinely devoted to each other and their children. Standing in this crowd, surrounded by people from all walks of life united in celebration, she felt connected to something larger than herself. Nearby, an elderly man named Arthur held a photograph of his late wife, who had dreamed of attending a coronation but had passed away the year before. Arthur had come in her honor, knowing she would have loved every moment of this day. As he waited for the balcony appearance, he told his wife's photograph about everything he had seen, feeling her presence beside him. Other people in the crowd noticed his gesture and were moved by it, some offering him kind words, others simply giving him space to grieve and celebrate simultaneously. The palace doors behind the balcony finally opened, and a roar went up from the crowd that seemed to shake the very ground. William and Catherine stepped out first, and the sight of them crowned and regal yet somehow still approachable, took everyone's breath away. The sun caught the jewels in their crowns, creating sparkles of light that seemed almost magical. Catherine's smile was radiant, genuine, reflecting the joy and relief of having made it through the ceremony successfully. Then came the children, and if the crowd had been enthusiastic before, they became absolutely euphoric now. George walked with careful dignity, clearly taking his role seriously, while Charlotte waved enthusiastically, her natural exuberance bringing delight to everyone watching. Louis, held by his father, looked around with wide eyes at the massive crowd, his expression a mixture of confusion and fascination that was absolutely endearing. This was not just the coronation of two individuals, but the presentation of a family that represented continuity and the future. William stepped forward to the balcony edge, and the crowd gradually quieted, sensing he might speak. But instead he simply raised his hand in a wave, his gesture both simple and profound. He was acknowledging the people, thanking them without words for their support and celebration. Catherine joined him, and together they stood as partners, equals, facing the future together. The symbolism was not lost on anyone. This was a modern monarchy, one that valued partnership and shared responsibility. The Royal Air Force had planned a flyover to mark the occasion, and right on schedule, the sound of approaching aircraft could be heard. All eyes turned skyward as the jets appeared, leaving trails of red, white, and blue smoke across the London sky. The precision of their formation was breathtaking, a display of skill and coordination that brought fresh cheers from the crowd. William, with his own military background, watched with particular appreciation. He knew the hours of practice that had gone into creating this perfect moment. As the aircraft passed overhead, young Prince George jumped excitedly, momentarily forgetting his formal role. The crowd loved it, the moment of childlike enthusiasm reminding everyone that despite the crowns and ceremony, this was a real family with real children who got excited about airplanes. Catherine placed a gentle hand on her son's shoulder, grounding him while also sharing in his excitement. These small, genuine moments were what people would remember most, the human touches that made the monarchy relatable. Television cameras captured every angle of the balcony scene, and broadcasters around the world provided commentary in dozens of languages. In homes from Australia to Canada, from South Africa to India, people watched and felt connected to this moment. The Commonwealth was more than just a political entity on days like this. It was a family of nations sharing in a tradition that transcended borders and cultures. For many, the monarchy represented a link to history and a sense of stability in a rapidly changing world. Back on the balcony, Catherine leaned down to whisper something to Charlotte, who giggled in response. The moment was caught on camera, and the image would become one of the most beloved of the entire day. It showed a mother and daughter sharing a private joke, a reminder that even in the most public moments, family bonds remained strong and personal. People in the crowd who had their own daughters felt a pang of recognition and connection. The family remained on the balcony for several minutes, waving, smiling, taking in the extraordinary sight of so many people gathered in celebration. William put his arm around Catherine's waist, a gesture of affection and support that felt natural despite the formal setting. They had been through so much together, from the early days of their relationship under intense media scrutiny to the joys and challenges of parenthood. And now, this culminating moment. Every experience had prepared them for this responsibility. As they finally turned to go back inside, the crowd's cheers reached a new crescendo, as if trying to hold on to the moment just a little longer. People waved frantically, called out words of love and support, snapped final photographs. This was the image they wanted to preserve, the memory of this perfect moment when history and humanity intersected beautifully. The balcony doors closed behind the royal family, but the emotion lingered in the air, almost tangible in its intensity. Inside, away from public view, Catherine finally allowed herself to fully feel the exhaustion. The day had been emotionally and physically draining, filled with pressure and significance. But it had also been beautiful, meaningful, and affirming. The public's response had exceeded even their most hopeful expectations. William pulled her close, and they stood together for a moment. Crowns still on their heads, formal attire still perfect, but simply being William and Catherine, two people who had taken on an extraordinary responsibility and were determined to fulfill it with grace and authenticity. Evening descended on London with a gentleness that seemed appropriate after such an emotionally charged day. The city lights began to twinkle, and celebrations continued in streets, pubs, and homes across the nation. Inside Buckingham Palace, the formal reception was underway, bringing together world leaders, diplomats, family members, and close friends. The atmosphere had shifted from the solemn reverence of the morning ceremony to something warmer and more personal, though still maintaining appropriate dignity and grace. William and Catherine moved through the reception with practiced ease, greeting guests and accepting congratulations. They had changed from their ceremonial robes into slightly less formal evening wear, though Catherine still wore a stunning gown and a smaller, more manageable crown. The relief of having the major public moments behind them was evident in their more relaxed body language, though they remained fully engaged with their duties as hosts. King Charles approached his son and daughter-in-law with visible emotion. The pride in his eyes was unmistakable, mixed with nostalgia for his own coronation and a touch of melancholy for all the years of waiting that had preceded this moment. He embraced William firmly, then took Catherine's hands in his, telling her how magnificently she had carried herself throughout the day. For Charles, this was both a beginning and a passing of the torch, a recognition that the future of the monarchy now rested firmly with the next generation. Catherine's parents, Michael and Carol, stood somewhat apart from the glittering crowd, still processing the reality of seeing their daughter crowned. Carol had maintained her composure beautifully throughout the day, but now, in this more private setting, tears flowed freely. Her husband held her close, understanding that these were tears of joy mixed with the overwhelming recognition of how far their family had come. They had raised their children with love and strong values, never imagining this extraordinary destiny. Prince George had been allowed to stay up later than usual for a brief appearance at the reception. He moved through the room with a mixture of childlike curiosity and developing royal bearing. Foreign dignitaries made a point to speak with him, recognizing him as a future king, and George handled the attention with remarkable poise for someone so young. Catherine kept a watchful eye on her son, ready to intervene if he became overwhelmed, but he seemed to be thriving on the experience. In a quiet corner, William's uncle and aunt pulled him aside for a private moment of family connection. They spoke of Princess Diana, knowing she would have been bursting with pride on this day. William's eyes glistened with tears he had held back all day, and he allowed himself this moment of vulnerability with people who understood his loss. Diana's absence was felt keenly, a shadow amid the celebration, but her legacy lived on in William's commitment to compassionate service and his determination to modernize the monarchy while respecting its traditions. Outside the palace walls, the celebrations continued. Street parties had erupted spontaneously throughout London and across the country. Neighbors who barely spoke to each other on ordinary days now shared food, drink, and stories. Music played from portable speakers, and impromptu dancing broke out in squares and parks. Children who should have been in bed hours ago were being allowed to stay up late, their parents recognizing the historic significance of the day and wanting them to be part of the memory. In a small flat in East London, the Singh family gathered around their television to watch the evening news coverage. They had immigrated to Britain 5 years earlier, and this coronation was their first experience of such a major British tradition. The parents explained to their children about the importance of unity and celebration, about how diverse Britain had become while still maintaining connections to its history. The coronation, they felt, was proof that tradition and progress could coexist, that change did not require abandoning the past. Social media continued to buzz with reactions, analyses, and personal stories related to the coronation. One post that went viral came from a young woman named Lisa, who had been struggling with depression. She wrote about how watching William and Catherine accept such enormous responsibility with grace and partnership had inspired her to face her own challenges with renewed courage. Thousands of people responded with their own stories of how the coronation had moved them, created connections, or provided hope. The ripple effects of the day extended far beyond pageantry and protocol. Back at the reception, Catherine found a moment to speak with several charity representatives who had been invited. She used this time to discuss ongoing projects and future initiatives, showing that even on this day of personal triumph, her commitment to service remained paramount. One charity worker later told reporters that Catherine had asked detailed questions about specific programs, demonstrating genuine knowledge and interest rather than superficial concern. This dedication to substance over appearance had always been one of Catherine's defining characteristics. As the evening progressed, William and Catherine were finally able to step out onto a private terrace, away from the crowds and cameras. The night air was cool and refreshing after the warmth of the reception. They stood together, looking out over London, seeing the lights of their capital city and knowing that somewhere out there, millions of people were thinking of them, celebrating them, placing their hopes and expectations upon them. The weight of that responsibility felt enormous, yet somehow manageable when shared. William turned to Catherine and asked her how she was truly feeling, beyond the public smiles and official statements. She thought carefully before answering, wanting to be honest even in her exhaustion. She told him she felt grateful, humbled and slightly terrified, but also strangely peaceful. The day had shown them that the public genuinely supported them, believed in them, wanted them to succeed. That goodwill was a precious gift, one they could not take for granted and must work daily to deserve. They spoke about their children, about wanting to give them as normal a childhood as possible, while preparing them for their unique futures. They discussed the causes they wanted to champion, the changes they hoped to inspire, the legacy they wanted to build, but mostly they simply held each other, drawing strength from their partnership, remembering why they had chosen this path together. The crowns on their heads were symbols of duty, but the love between them was what would sustain them through whatever challenges lay ahead. Inside the palace, the reception was beginning to wind down. Guests said their farewells, many lingering to savor these final moments of a historic day. The staff, who had worked tirelessly to make everything perfect, allowed themselves small smiles of satisfaction. They had executed flawlessly under enormous pressure, and their professionalism had contributed significantly to the day's success. Their roles might be behind the scenes, but they understood their importance to the larger picture. As midnight approached, William and Catherine finally made their way to their private quarters. They removed their crowns carefully, placing them on velvet cushions where they would be secured until needed again. The weight lifted from their heads was both literal and metaphorical. For now, they could just be William and Catherine again, a married couple at the end of an extraordinary but exhausting day. They checked on their sleeping children, pulling blankets up and placing gentle kisses on foreheads. Finally, in the privacy of their room, they could fully process everything that had happened. They looked at each other and simultaneously began to laugh, releasing the tension and emotion they had contained all day. The laughter turned to tears, which turned back to laughter, a cathartic release of everything they had experienced. They had done it. They had stepped into their new roles with dignity and authenticity. The future stretched before them, full of both promise and uncertainty. Catherine stood by the window one last time, looking out at London now quiet and still in the deep night. Somewhere out there in homes and hospitals, in palaces and flats, people were going to sleep with memories of this day. Some would dream of crowns and ceremony. Others would remember the human moments, the genuine smiles, the family connections. The coronation would be recorded in history books, analyzed by scholars, remembered by generations. But for Catherine, the most important thing was simpler. They had remained true to themselves while honoring tradition. They had shown that duty and authenticity could coexist, and they had done it together, partners in every sense, ready to face whatever tomorrow might bring with courage, compassion, and commitment to serve.